Hello, hello. This is the 182nd Test from the Future, an experimental podcast from the year 2224, which we are sending from our present to yours. My name is Dirk.
And my name is Simon.
And we're putting the past in podcast. In previous episode, 145, we spoke about the greatest discoveries of all time. And today we're going to talk about one of these discoveries.
The one that came in second place.
No, first.
No, first place.
First. It came first. But it was close, I remember.
You're right. I got it mixed up.
And what came in second place were the cavemen.
Correct, yeah.
And they were discovered at the same time. And they finished very close. Yeah, I also had to look it up which one won. The fairy tale folk won.
Okay.
And this is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I did a in previous episode intro. In the previous episode. Oh, did you hear this?
I was not paying attention, I'm sorry.
No, I thought...
Got
because
something else on my mind at the moment.
So, sometimes we just refer back to random previous episodes. This time I actually put in effort and looked up which one was this.
Yeah, right, the actual episode number.
Episode 145. Yeah, so the fairy tale folk. So they were discovered, quick recap, 7 years ago. Very recent, which is why I think they won the greatest discovery of all time. Is it really the greatest discovery of all time? Much room for debate.
Sure, there's some recency bias there.
Yeah, exactly. But there's no denying it's a pretty cool discovery. And how were they discovered? It's when so
when the CAM network extended basically into where they live. Hadn't got that far yet, even though CAM network's been around a really long time. Hadn't got there. Once it got there, check out all this cool stuff everyone can see on the feed. Yeah, we were filling in the gaps. This was this big, massive valley in Georgia where there hadn't been any cams installed yet. There weren't any free-floating cams there. Right. And then just filling in the gaps and then make this sudden discovery. Fairy tale folk are actually living there. That's a massive valley. Okay, fair enough. We overlooked it so far. Yeah, so valley in the Caucasus, the Tusheti Valley. I don't think it was that famous before. No, I think this put it on the map.
Yes, definitely. That's a pretty unique selling point as a valley. We have genuine fairy tale folk living here. Yeah, so we already got some questions about it after the episode and some more recently. And then we said, let's do a whole episode about this. Because fairy tale folk is very generic, maybe? Or very...
Sure, it's generic because it includes so many different types of fairy tale folk. But yeah, okay, let's go into more detail because on the face of it, it's too generic.
Yeah. But maybe before we get into the individual types, the actual valley.
Right, we can talk about that for a bit.
So, how do you get in and out of the valley?
Sure. So there's a river, and you need to float along the river. Yeah. But you can't be in a powered boat for some reason. So if the boat has a motor or otherwise powered, you travel along the river, but you don't see any fairy tale folk. But if you're floating unpowered, like on a raft or actually on a boat which has a motor, but the motor's switched off completely, then it looks almost the same, but then all of a sudden, hey, now that I am actually in... So if you're floating through, then suddenly you realise, actually now it feels very different, looks very different, and there are lots of fairy tale folk around.
And it's, I think, at part an underground river, right? At least at the beginning.
Part of it, yeah.
And turns out it's not magic. It is some kind of natural occurring thing.
Yeah. Oh. And so you can't teleport directly into the valley, but you can teleport to the mouth of the river, which is obviously for us here in Frankfurt, that's the fastest way to get there. But from that point on, you need to take an unpowered boat.
Yeah. And that's also, I guess, kind of a reason why it took us so long to find out that they're there, is that the times of unpowered things are long behind us.
Exactly. So who's going to be doing this? Yeah,
exactly. On the other hand, it explains why they were able to get there long ago, because that's how fairy tale folk transport, unpowered. And funny thing about this river, it works both ways.
Correct, for leaving there as well.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a point. So say you do go in there on in a boat that's got the motor switched off. Once you're in there, you can't power the motor back up.
Yeah.
It just won't work. But once you drift back out, then it will work again.
Yeah. Again, not magic. Again, some natural occurrence.
Yeah.
Apparently, yeah. So, but not a bad thing, in my opinion. I think humanity, Earth population, has not a really good track record of discovering new societies and then leaving them alone.
Yeah, and this is, definitely not in the past. Been trying to do better lately, and so this is a really nice. This has been a nice opportunity to actually put into practice, the ideals that we've come up with the last 100 years or so of how would it actually be good to interact with a society that doesn't know about all the modern day stuff that we've got going on.
Yep.
So far, it's going pretty well.
And we have not really yet tried to make our own moral system
to impose it.
Yeah, exactly.
Left all that well alone. And then more practical things, for example, they don't have Congos.
Yeah.
It's not, all the big companies that make food Congos, they've not been allowed to go in there and be like, hey, buy our Congos.
Yeah.
Been kept separate.
Also,
the Congos wouldn't work there anyway, based on the...
I guess, yeah.
The boat motors.
And there wouldn't not really be an infrastructure for them anyway, I guess. But we haven't been installing any teleporters in there. Closest you can get to is to the mouth of the river. I think...
And that's the point, actually. We mentioned the cams earlier. That's how it was discovered. But the cams themselves don't go into the valley. Yeah. It's that they noticed through the cams, people observed fairy tale folk appearing at the mouth of this river, coming out.
Exactly. And peek over the edges of the mountains and occasionally notice interesting things happening on the other side. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So big question that puzzled us obviously at the beginning was not just how on earth can we have overlooked this, but how did they get there? So because it's not just fairy tale folk from one typical fairy tale.
From all over the world.
Exactly. This? How did they get there?
How did they get there? No, I don't know that. They've not given an interview, I guess, where they would say it. Or at least they is a huge amount of people.
Yes.
No one from the fairy tale folk have explained how they got there.
But they did migrate there on purpose, right? Kind of like a refuge. Like the world around us is changing. We're not really necessary anymore, or wanted, or don't like it, or something.
Seems to be the gist, yeah.
Yeah, because that's a funny thing. They don't age.
Right. So the fairy tale folk who are there now are the same ones who went there long ago.
Yeah.
They're not like their descendants or something like that.
And it's not like being one immortal character among others that are not. They're all immortal, apparently. And they don't age, so they kind of stay the same. So their lives stay the same. Old woman spinning the spinning wheel has been doing that for centuries. Kids running around, playing with ducks, whatever kids are doing.
With ducks, sure.
Have been doing that for ages. Yeah. Going to school every year, learn the same class.
And maybe that explains why the orcs were quite enthusiastic to mingle, like to get on out of there, because presumably some of them weren't so satisfied doing orcish things all that time.
I guess so, yeah. Maybe getting slightly bored. Although I guess if it's all you do, and it's not like, they walk up the same stairs every day and eat the same apple every day.
No,
it's kind of like seasons change and so on, but generally they kind of stay in their area. Maybe we to clarify for our listeners, we've already mentioned a few.
Right. But we can go through some of the rest.
Yeah.
Or some others at least. I mentioned orcs just then. But then sure, should I just say some of them? You say some of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, so then sure, there were wizards, gnomes, Jengu,
Sprites,
yep. Genies.
Elves.
Elves and hobbits. Mermaids in the river, mainly.
Werewolves.
And there's half animals, half human, like hybrid creatures. I don't know what you'd call those, but...
And fairies and I think there's like we're just kind of doing this out of the top of our heads.
Yeah.
There are many different kinds,
Yeah.
and also kinds that you know but you didn't realize you knew.
Yeah.
And it's like you run into a sprite, you go like, right, I know you guys. I had forgotten about it, but they all live there,
Yeah.
and they're from all over the world.
Yes.
So from all the fairy tales. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But the interesting thing is, they are kind of like, from fairy tales, but also kind of not.
Yeah, I mean, because fairy tales are tales, so stories that have been told about them, and some of those stories maybe were accurate, but some of them maybe were a bit less accurate.
And
so
also,
it's been fun to find out what are they actually like.
And also, like, they've been living their lives all the time.
Sure.
Besides, they're kind of like they're part in a certain fairy tale or in a certain fairy tale environment. They also have their own kind of preferences that didn't really had a presence in the fairy tale.
Correct. Yeah. Right. For example, like gnomes. I don't know. I mean, the gnomes we can talk about in a sec, but actually, hobbits. I think this never really comes up in stories about hobbits, but they really like EDM, electronic dance music.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah. And like I say, that doesn't really come up in the stories that are told about them.
And it's also that's something that you immediately kind of forms a connection, right? So a surprising thing, you then learn about hobbits, and then it's like, hey, I like this too. If you like this too,
if you do, yeah.
I find it personally very interesting that gnomes, for example, I mean, they're known around the world as gnomes. We call them gnomes.
English, yeah.
But they don't call themselves gnomes.
No, they prefer the Dutch word, yeah?
Exactly. They call themselves kabouters, which is the Dutch word for gnome, which I found kind of cute.
Yeah. And I mean, you can imagine that makes sense for the gnomes from the Netherlands, but it's the case for the gnomes from wherever they're from, yeah? That they like that, they prefer that as their name.
And it could be even a thing where, maybe that's what they were originally called, and in our fairy tales throughout ages, they kind of, like, they got a different name, and we all got used to this, but, like, the original folk, the same with genies, right? They call themselves djinns.
Right. But then in English, for example, they're called genies, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I mean, but this is still
but
kind
that's
of...
more an obvious thing, yeah.
And it's kind of roughly the same word, maybe pronounced a little different.
Right, but speaking of genies, it's been really interesting to learn. So often in stories of genies, someone will wish for a thing, and the genie will grant the wish, and, it will be, sure, granting it, like, to the letter of the wish, but the whole point is that the genie is tricky and, like, will grant it in such a way that actually really doesn't work out.
Exactly. And in stories, it's like you want a hamburger, and you get a hamburger, but it's super tiny. Something
like that.
Yeah,
That wouldn't be such a harsh thing, but yeah. But sure, the actual genies that we've been meeting, maybe in response to those stories, they are extra thorough. Yes. So, you wish for something, so taking your hamburger as an example, and they will ask so many follow-up questions. They'll clarify every detail for intended and unintended consequences. Like, how will this affect your digestion for the next few days as well?
Yes, exactly.
After, okay, what should it actually taste like? What should it actually be made of? For example, do you want the bun to have gluten in it or not? Really thorough.
You want your hamburger to be in a big ice cube or not? Something that I hadn't really thought about before. Because I mean, if you don't specify that,
experience. Yeah. Do you want it cooked or frozen?
It's really like sometimes being at this old fashioned Congo that kept asking questions. You want a hamburger? You want lettuce? Do you want it spicy? Which sauce do you want to go on it? Do you want it extra fries with it? Oh man, it just takes forever. By the time you get your hamburger, you're not hungry anymore.
I mean, that's a cynical thing, maybe. That meaning a cynical take on it could be. Actually, they're asking so many questions just so they don't have to grant the wishes. Could be. But I think it's rather, like I say, in response to the stories that they are so tricky. They don't. I mean, that's not true. But they want to be extra sure it's not true, so they're being very thorough.
And I guess also maybe they don't want to be prosecuted afterwards. They just want to be. What I found interesting to learn. So there are fairy tale folk that may have had their fairy tales, but they maybe not really survived into modern age.
Meaning the fairy tales didn't survive. Yeah. So they would have been famous like 500 years ago, but now they're not famous anymore.
Yeah, we had forgotten about them, or maybe nobody decided to write them down, and back in the days they were just being told. This was for me with the were people. So I never realized that werewolves were just half of the story.
Right.
So like
so werewolves being like people who once a month turn into wolves.
Yeah.
Where people being the other way around. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. So they are a wolf most of the time until it's full moon and they turn into a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Put on a nice bowler hat.
Yep.
You know, get their walking stick, have a cup of tea, and then turn them back into a wolf when the day starts. It's interesting that the people who are people most of the time are called werewolves, and the wolves that are wolf most of the time are called werepeople. Yeah. So I guess they're only
like named for what they change into rather than what they are.
Than what they are most of the time. Yeah. So this seems to be kind of like nature putting things into balance. So these are so something I learned, something I really didn't know.
Right.
Any other things that?
I mean, one that was super. I mean, I think people already suspected this, but okay, now there's confirmation. In stories, mermaids are usually depicted as the lower half being a fish and the upper half being a human. But I mean, people have pointed out that doesn't really make much sense. And that's not how it is. Actually, they are top half fish, bottom half like a human. Yeah, makes much more sense.
I mean, if you really rely on the stories, you don't know any better. But just imagine that for a moment. A top half human underwater most of the time.
That's tricky.
That's not going to work. Right. And you need this whole lung system that the fish have. Yeah. So
the gills. Yeah.
The gills. That's it. And I think with the orcs, I think we pointed that out a few times already. They kind of have their image against them. They're very social. I mean, they play their role when necessary, but they're very social. They're also the ones that most of them stick to the valley, but the orcs venture out into the world, and it's one of the few fairy tale folk that you can occasionally encounter.
Yeah, here in Frankfurt.
Here in Frankfurt, for example. Yeah. Okay. One thing I thought was interesting, we're now talking about, let's say, the generic type of fairy tale folk, but they also have celebrities.
Indeed. Some of which we know about through fairy tales, indeed. Some of which we don't, but of course, let's talk about the ones we do, because...
My favorite one was Kintaro, also known as the Golden Boy.
Right, yeah.
Which is pretty famous there.
And Rumpelstiltskin is also very famous. Maybe even, I think, more famous, like he's known of nowadays, but like meaning outside. So in Frankfurt, for example, his name's familiar. He's not super famous yet. But in the valley there, he is a super popular celebrity. That's
also the thing. If you would see Rumpelstiltskin walking around here, you wouldn't really...
Right, it doesn't look... It just looks like a guy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's in relatively short person, but that's about it. So you wouldn't really get noticed. But like Snow White, who's also a celebrity there, I guess if you see her walking around, you would still go like, I know her from somewhere. Sure. So you would already guess this is a famous person. So this is kind of a difference.
Right, but you maybe couldn't put your finger on where you know her from.
Yeah, I mean also who expects to see the actual Snow White?
Sure,
that's also a different thing. But they're actually famous in the valley as well.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting, when they walk around, of course, how does it work when you're a celebrity in this kind of area? And then the people want themselves painted.
Like alongside whoever the celebrity is.
Exactly. So if Snow White visits a village, then local people will go, can you do a painting with me? And then, then they pose together, and then a painter quickly, 2-3 hours, and then paint them together.
Yeah, but I mean, yes. But so for example, in this case, the celebrity only needs to pose for one, because then the painter can, of course, put in different people next to the...
you see, I'm not sure if they do that.
No? I mean, I also don't know that they do, but it seems like that would make more sense, rather than a celebrity needing to stand there for 3 hours per per painting. Maybe they don't offer it that often.
I'm not sure. Like, I don't think that makes sense. Like in the valley, a lot of things seem to work differently. It's like it might just not make sense, but it still happens like that anyway.
I mean, they have time. Actually, that's a good point. Like
exactly.
3 hours for you or I, that sounds like a long time to sit around waiting for your painting to be painted, portrait to be painted. But sure, you're living for eternity. It's not such a big deal.
And it's also, might just be a typical human thing, if we would stand next to it and you see the painter doing several paintings after each other, or a natural reaction would be, that makes no sense. How about, and you start to interfere, but that's exactly what we don't want to do. Huh? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But you can see it's hard.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
So we've been talking about what we've known so far.
Yeah.
Reading, from seeing interviews and so on. But what we discussed earlier is how about we look at the cams, see what's going on there at the moment, or at least what we can observe.
Yeah.
Of what's going there there at the moment.
That's a good idea. I had almost forgotten about that. Mm-hmm. Then let's bring them up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they will be a little higher up, so we need to zoom in a little. Okay. So the one I usually go to is down at the moment.
Yep.
Do you find one that has anything interesting?
Not so far. Like I say, the cams themselves don't work within the valley, so we're observing from outside.
Yeah, so we need to zoom in a bit. Okay. So there's seem to see. Okay, I'm giving you the coordinates of my cam. Mm-hmm. So see there at the cave.
Yep.
See, there must be something happening inside the cave. It's a shame we can't look into it. So there are a bunch of hobbits gathered around the cave.
Yeah.
So
right, looks like they're drinking. Can't really see what they're drinking, but they've got some drinks going on.
Yeah. And now they're making way. So there might just be something coming out of the cave. It's more hobbits. The rolling barrels out of the cave.
Okay.
Okay, so...
Well, okay then.
This could be... Okay, so now they're putting the barrels up. There's wine in the barrels.
That's what
they were drinking.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're just getting more wine. Okay.
Fair enough.
Hobbits are drinking wine at the moment. Okay. Cool. So, live from the valley. No big dragon fight. No big Snow White being rescued again.
I see. Yeah, no. I mean, presumably day-to-day life.
Yes. Okay. This was some...
I mean, that's usually what you see on cams, yeah?
Yes, that is true, actually. Yeah. Okay. We have a listener question that kind of ties in with this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep, that's why we figured we'd answer it today. So let me read it. So Alba wrote to us, "Greetings from Earth. Quick question. How good can you zoom in from your satellites? Can you see if somebody is feeding their guinea pig? Cheers." So thanks for the question, Alba. Our satellites are very good.
Yes.
How good can you zoom in? You zoom in all the way down to seeing, so from space, to individual blades of grass.
Yep. Really strong.
That's a proper magnification, yeah. And so that's really useful for looking directly down at things.
Yes.
Obviously doesn't help you much when things are in caves or in houses or under roofs.
Yeah.
And so, for example, guinea pigs tend to not be out in the open. So when you want to double check, are the guinea pigs being fed, better to rely on a cam.
Yeah.
Like maybe at eye level or, basically at the appropriate height on the ground there that you can see, rather than relying on a satellite from space.
Yep. Satellite is useful also for really big areas, quickly scanning big areas. Or, as Simon was pointing out, straight down, which is working for the valley where the fairy tale folk are living.
Indeed.
Which explains why we can't look into houses or caves there.
Right.
For that.
And there's a whole lot of tree coverage there as well.
True, yeah. So for that kind of detail, you actually need to go there.
Yeah.
On a boat.
On a boat.
That's not powered.
Exactly, drifting along the river there.
Or a floaty.
Yeah.
You could work on a floaty.
Could do.
Floaty's not powered.
True. You mean like the kind that they use in a swimming pool, yeah?
Yeah, like a donut or a unicorn.
Yeah, I know the kind you mean, yeah. Yeah, that should work too.
Cool. Does it, I'm not sure about the temperature there. So it's a fun thing to do in the summer.
Yeah. Well, you're relaxing anyway.
Yeah.
Laying on a floaty, having a drink, drift on into the valley there.
Yeah. Seeing the wizards making fireworks while you flow by on your floaty. Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. I would say that was it for this week.
I reckon so. Our listeners who've been listening to us talk just now, please send an email to michaellasagna5@gmail.com. Put the number 182 into the subject line so that we can know this episode all about fairy tale folk successfully went back in time. And if you have any questions like Alba there, feel free to ask them as well.
Okay, then thanks for listening and see you in 200 years.
Bye-bye.